It all can have an effect. I mean, you know, bikes there's at least one that was assigned to that immediate area. There certainly were some, you know, not far away, and so that, in conjunction with cars who may be in the area, Center City is somewhat congested anyway. So all those things can be a factor. It's just no one way to say how many police officers will show up at any given scene. Sometimes you'll have far more volatile scenes from the beginning where you wish you had more, and they just aren't able to get there. So it's just no sure way to put it.
Just a few more. Have you spoken with the FOP since this incident?
I have not.
Have you had a chance to meet the two men who were arrested?
No, and to be honest with you, by design, I wouldn't have done that because there was a fax, I believe, that was sent immediately that, you know, don't talk to my clients. So I would be within that scope as well, so it wouldn't be expected.
Is it going to be now more malicious approach? They enter a business, for example, on a trespassing disturbance call, and they talk with the manager, talk with the folks that are being called, or what is?
Well, they did all that. They talked to the manager. I mean, that's who called, and so that part wouldn't change. I think the one thing that, you know, probably we tacitly thought or understood was that there was going to be charges pressed, and in fact, that was not going to be the case, but I understand why they would have thought that. That's what the call was, and you see them being escorted out. But that would be part of any new process to ensure that that individual who's in charge of that entity or that place would say, I have in fact, and obviously this wouldn't apply to Starbucks under these circumstances, but in any other one where there are myriad, are you in fact going to prosecute before we leave? If you are not, we are leaving, and that's just the way it is. It is a very unfortunate circumstance all the way around. Again, for those who either naively, even some maliciously, who think that I don't understand issues of race, I'm 54 years old. I've been an African American my entire life. And yes, I've been in situations where I've seen racism and prejudice in a variety of ways. Based on what these officers responded to, I just don't believe that was the case here. As for that manager, that's a whole nother ballgame. But as far as these officers, they acted in due diligence on what they knew. They tried for quite a bit of time. But again, I understand the optics. I understand it. And I'd be remiss to say that I didn't, particularly in light of, as I've said about 5 times, what I now know is Starbucks policy. It became somewhat amazing to me, the number of people who have told me that there are just a plethora of people who believe that everybody knows Starbucks policy. Well, I don't drink coffee and I don't go to Starbucks. And so, you know, whether you say shame on me for that, I'll accept that, but I didn't know it, but I can only assume the police officers didn't know it as well. I can assure you of this, that had they known that this would not have gone that way. And the more important thing to emphasize is I guarantee you they had better things to do than deal with a call like this, which essentially from Starbucks' own policy violated their policy. They would have rather been out there preventing someone from getting hurt in another way than in this fashion. And so they were put in some ways in an untenable position. And I know some people either don't or refuse to understand that, but that's just the reality. But it is me who in large part made most of the situation worse than it was. And so for that, you know, it is my sincere apology to those 2 men and even to these officers and to the other people around this city who I failed in a variety of ways on this incident.
Did those 2 men cooperate with your officers when they arrived?
There's some dialogue, but what is interesting in the video, there is no audio. And you can't actually see the 2 men in the video screen, even though they had multiple screens, but no matter which one we look at, we can't see them, but you can see the officers. And you can see they're relaxed. At one point, one's literally on the back of a chair like this with his legs crossed, which is not indicative of someone who's about to, you know, jump across the table or anything like that. The fact that they were there for well over 10 minutes suggests that they are trying in all earnest to resolve this situation. It's just one situation that I understand all the way around, and none of that makes for their discomfort, their lack of sentiments towards the police as a result, I understand, and I understand how disconcerting it could have been, but I also understand the position the police were put in because someone made a call knowing that their policy differed than what they put out.
That's it, guys.
There was some dialogue between officers, and then may have suggested that they were speaking down to your officers and giving them a hard time, texting them 3 times a week. Is any of that true?
Well, yeah, I mean, but again, and I'll say it for about the 7th or 8th time now, presumably, like myself, they knew nothing about Starbucks' policy. And so here you got 2 opposing forces probably understandably not coming to a meeting of the minds on this because these officers have probably on countless occasions responded to calls like that from merchants who wanted people gone because their policy is in fact that if you don't purchase something that you are supposed to leave. And those men undoubtedly can't understand why am I even being asked to leave in the first place? Because this is your policy, this is your, and it took a while for me to understand it, even my conversations with the CEO, but he spent some time with me. And me talking with other folks who frequent Starbucks, I have a better understanding. And as a result of that understanding, I know that it is me that was flawed in this situation.
So did the officers have a choice to not arrest the men even though they refused?
Well, you have to put it in the proper context. So if you take it outside of Starbucks, right? Because if you leave it in Starbucks, then it becomes like a circular logic. But if it's outside of Starbucks where a place clearly has a policy where they expect you to purchase something and you do not, and then they call the police. The police then are stuck in a situation where they're asked to remove someone. And so we don't kidnap people, and people were saying, well, why didn't you just handcuff them and throw them outside? Well, that's not the law. And once we take it to that far, then we have to assume that we're arresting you. The first aim was to try to get them out of the store, and there were negotiations. There are many who undoubtedly, and I understand it, will think that that was not enough. But I would submit to you that 10 minutes of trying to do that, but again, I balance that with now understanding why these men thought what they thought. And so the officers would have had no way of knowing that. You can't expect for them to walk in every business and intuitively know what every policy is. I mean, that is unreasonable in many instances. And so, but again, I mean, it just comes back to a notion that we have to do better. I have to do better. Or whoever sits in this chair has to do better, whoever that may be. They have to do better. And so at the end of the day, that is my pledge to everybody in this city to do better. And so I just close with, again, you know, my apologies to both them, the police officers, and everybody else in this city because I exacerbated the situation with my messaging. Real simple.
I just wanted to congratulate if you talked to both of the officers, and is there anything that they want the general public to know?
I had several conversations with your arresting officer, and he was absolutely from the beginning, and this is, still don't even know if to this point, if he absolutely knows Starbucks' policy, because I haven't spoken to him about that part. But I can tell you from the beginning, he has been absolutely mortified. Nothing about this officer, and I did my homework, suggests that he's a guy who goes out to harass anyone. He was just trying to do his job. He was put in a very unfortunate circumstance. People talk about the word discretion. Discretion, as I've said a couple times this week, does not mean that option A or option B, that if you choose either one, that one is wrong and one is right. Discretion means that you have the discretion. It's much like if I stopped you for a traffic violation and say Ku Kennebrew gives you a ticket and I don't, I'm not right and he's not wrong, or even vice versa. That's discretion. And so I would submit to folks also that talk about de-escalation, that 10 minutes of conversation was an effort of de-escalation. The problem is you had an imperfect storm brewing where 2 different people were viewing through 2 different sets of lenses, and that's not to make an excuse for police. I'm just saying that, you know, that's probably had a lot to do with the situation.
Commissioner Ross, you, the policy that you spoke of,
Right.
you're working on that, it's coming?
It's actually,
Last question, guys.
so the gentleman behind you in the suit, Staff Inspector Healy, actually has already completed that. We have not pushed that out. And, you know, at some point in time, we will let you know. But it really is going to deal with making sure you identify the person, making sure that person clearly articulates what their policy is, trying to de-escalate the situation, and even if you need to and you think it requires it, calling in an officer with crisis intervention training if you think it goes to that level. Most of the time they won't. This is a very routine call, believe it or not, that in many instances is resolved before we even get there. Sometimes it's just the threat of calling the police, sometimes it's our presence, and sometimes it's other discussions. Are there arrests made for this frequently? Yes, there are. There are, so.
When do you anticipate that the policy will?
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. We're going to push it out as soon as we can, all right? So the important thing to let you know is, although it's probably somewhat of a unique policy, it is one that we feel, given the circumstances and all that has happened with this, that it warrants our implementing a policy of this kind.
Thank you.
guys.
All right?
Yeah.